Hey everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Business of Sports show. Today, our calendars have finally aligned, and I've got a really special guest because not only is he big in the world of sports, he's massive in the world of business. I think you've heard of a little business called Just Eat. Well, today my guest is David Buttress, who is not only the chairman of the Dragons, but also he has a little history in business as well. Welcome, Dave.
Nice to see you, Matt, and apologies for all the diary stuff, but it's great to be here finally and talk to you.
Well, appreciate your time. I mean, people aren't going to be aware of this, but we're literally doing this whilst you're eating your dinner in the evening. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, when you're a father of four, you have to grab every moment you can.
Perfect. So, for people who don't know you, introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, great to be here. Like I said, Matt, I'm David Buttress. I'm the chairman of the Dragons rugby team in South Wales, where I've been working probably for the last 4 or so years. I think Welsh rugby years are a bit like dog years for those of you who know it well.
Very true, yeah.
Yeah, which probably explains my hairline a little bit. And then like you said, my background is actually not in sport at all. My background actually is in business. So as a passionate amateur sportsman only, but nevertheless, most of my career, from the age of 18 till my late 40s now, has been spent pretty much building and investing in technology companies.
So let's go right the way to the start then. Kind of how did you get into that?
Yeah, like all good stories, it starts in a pub, really. So when I studied a law and business degree, and when I graduated at 21, I joined Coca-Cola as a graduate trainee. I guess like lots of people do when they finish college, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, other than I was always passionate about, genuinely wanted to get into business, but more into corporate life, really. So I did that for 7-8 years. I ended up in my last job at Coke or 2, I was running the UK sort of restaurant business for them with all the major restaurant groups. And that got me really passionate about, the restaurant industry in particular. I got to meet guys like Robbie Entervan that started Nando's back in the day. The guys at the restaurant group that run all the major restaurant brands like Frankie and Benny's, Pizza Express, brands like that. And so that got me really into the restaurant industry. And then what happened was an old colleague of mine from from Coca-Cola in Denmark said, we've got this entrepreneur called Jesper Buch who started Just Eat in Denmark, who's the founder. And he's created this, this really interesting digital business. And remember, this is back in 2005, right? So this is early days, I guess, relatively early days. But they said, look, he's quite colourful and he's coming to London. Would you mind showing him round, explain how the UK restaurant market works, etc. And I like the guy. So I said, yeah, of course, I'll do it a bit of a favour. So Jesper and I ended up hanging out. We ended up having a Nando's. Yeah, we did have a Nando's, I think. And then we ended up in a bar in Hammersmith having a beer. And at the end of that sort of meeting, first time I met him, he said, listen, let's start Just Eat together in the UK. And as you can imagine, I was sort of 7 years into corporate life. I'm like, what the fuck is this guy about? Literally known him 5 minutes. And he's like, trying to tap me up for a job or trying to, tap me up to come and start this business with him and give up, what I had, which was at that time a steady day job, if you like, 7 years corporate career. But I just liked him. So he went back to Denmark. I think during that time I went and got married. And a couple of months later, he was coming back to London. So I think we ended up in Nando's again. And we ended up in a bar.
Sorry, other restaurants are available.
Other restaurants are available. I just happen to really like Nando's. and then we ended up in a bar again. And one beer turned into quite a few beers. And by the end of the evening, he was like, look, I'm going to come and do this. I want you to come and do it with me. Let's start Just Eat in the UK. And I kind of I remember going home and I'll tell you what I said to my wife. I said to her, if we don't do this, someone's going to. Because I obviously knew the UK restaurant market pretty well. It's so fragmented, tens of thousands of small independent local delivery takeaways. And consumers are moving digitally. At the time, people were already booking flights and hotels online. Like, why would you not book your takeaways? Of course you were going to do that at some point. It was just a matter of time. And so I sort of kicked the tires a little bit and thought about it, and I had a really great boss, which I think goes back to what we all need in life sometimes, is a really great boss. And I had a brilliant boss called Will Usher at Coca-Cola, who was next captain in the army. And he said, David, go and do it, because, if you don't go and try it, you probably always regret it. And you know, the worst comes to the worst, it wasn't that brave a decision, because in 2005 the job market was so good that, frankly, if for 6-12 months we'd have gone pop, then, you know, probably I could have got a job back at Coke or something like that. So it wasn't that brave a decision. Left Coke, resigned. We started Just Eat on March the 1st, 2006 in the UK, which is St. David's Day for good luck, which was deliberate.
Yeah.
And the rest, we had lots of bumps along the way, but I guess the rest to some extent is history, as the cliche goes.
Yeah, and that's crazy. And I think it kind of almost feels like it was I don't know, a blockbuster Netflix moment of going, actually, there's something in this, because people are already getting takeaways. They're already, you know, the guy on the scooter delivering them. Like you said, people are already starting to book flights online, you know, the iPhone, all of these kind of things there. Yeah, it just feels like you were there at that moment, ready for, you know, that blockbuster or Netflix moment.
Yeah, you need a bit of luck on times, and all credit to Jesper. I mean, he had a level of conviction that was, and a passion that was contagious, and so all credit to him. I sort of, you know, rode on his coattails, really. I mean, I followed on, and so all credit to Jesper. He's a brilliant founder. Actually, he's one of the main dragons now in Shark Tank, as it's called in Scandinavia. So he's like,
Nice.
he's a bit like the Peter Jones of Scandinavia now, Jesper. So he does lots of investing now. He's invested in some great tech companies since he left Just Eat as well. So he's an interesting guy, actually, and still good friends to this day. So I'm very, you know, very grateful that he sort of come over and over a couple of beers said, let's go and do it.
Nando's.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I left. We started Just Eat when I was 29. I left when I was 42, I think, or 41. So he ruined my entire 30s. I think I must have worked, I don't know how many hours I worked, but it was insane. So, you know, he owes me a decade of my life. But other than that, it's
Yeah, imagine that on a piece of paper. I owe you. Yeah. I mean, it's funny that you say that he's now gone on to be one of the dragons over there, because I remember watching Dragon's Den years and years ago when Hungryhouse, I think it was on there, and I don't know if they got investment, but during my research, you know, I kind of saw that. Was that one of the businesses that you helped acquire and bring into the Just Eat kind of family? Because they seem,
yeah, I bought that business in 2016. But what was funny, mate, I remember that night because Jesper and we didn't know each other existed. And so we started March 1st, 2006, as you know now. In August 2006, I walked into a takeaway in Putney High Street. For those of you who know Southwest London, I walked in this takeaway and I saw this Hungry House sticker, and I was like, what's that? And then I realized, that was the first time I realized we had a competitor, because up until then we thought we had the market pretty much to ourselves, other than Domino's, obviously, who were already online and a major brand. Yeah. So and I was like, oh my God, we got a competitor. And that feels like, honestly, to a startup entrepreneur, that's like the end of the world. Oh my God, someone else is doing what we're doing. We're finished. Yeah. And as you know, in reality, you're not. Having a competitor is validating, it spurs you on to better things and all the good things that comes from that. So it also helps the market, because it, validates to consumers and to restaurants that there's more than one person trying this, so they can't all be, batshit crazy, because there's more than one person who's had the same idea. So,
and it educates. At the end of the day, people have to realize how to do these things. And
and it spurred me on. Like I say, I'm a pretty competitive person, so it spurred me on. And I just said to Jesper, look, for every one restaurant they get, let's make sure we get 3. And we just had that. We just had this metric where we got to be at least 3 times bigger than them in every postcode for restaurant choice. We knew choice was an important thing for customers and consumers, so we just wiped the floor with them when it came to the choice of restaurants. And we also expanded really quickly. So they stayed in Southwest London for really too long, which is a big strategic mistake. And we just stood like a weed around all the old university cities of the UK. And by the time they looked up in January 2008, we'd sort of surrounded them in Southwest London, but in the meantime expanded everywhere. And it was very difficult for them to come to, say, then Leeds and go, well, we do the same thing as Just Eat. And we'd been in Leeds for 2 years, had all the restaurants, had most of the consumers. And then it was really tough for them. They never really recovered from that. But the night of the Dragon's Den thing, I was honestly sat watching it like, oh my God, the free advertising, those bastards at the BBC are giving this they're giving these guys literally free 5-minute ad on the BBC, and we were like, oh my! I thought that was honestly going to be the end of the world, but it turned out to be okay. It turned out all right. They did get They declined the offer. They did get an offer, from I think Theo Pathetis, if I've said that correctly, I hope so, and Peter Jones. I think two dragons made them an offer, but they declined it because they wanted too much equity in the business. So
I
yeah,
always find that with Dragons Den, it always seems like they always want a huge slice of the pie, and same as watching the American Shark Tank. It always seems like they always want. I mean, the money seems incredibly different. You know, Shark Tank in America, they go after like, I want $250,000 dollars for this, or I want $500,000 for this, and in the UK we go, can I have £20,000 for 20% of my company? It always seems like there's a big imbalance there.
yeah.
But
I don't really, honestly, as an investor, like Dragon's Den for me is, I think it's entertaining, but I think as an investor, I'm not sure how seriously you can take it like that way. But I think
yeah,
it's a brilliant program and interesting. Obviously I like business, so I enjoy watching it and stuff. But yeah, in terms of the equity, sometimes they ask for relatively small investments. It doesn't really make tons of sense because you can end up writing your own
yeah,
gravestone as an entrepreneur if you're not careful.
yeah, kind of giving away a huge chunk of your business for, like you said, a small amount of money when actually you probably need a bit more money later on. But how did it feel then to actually go and buy Hungry House then?
Yeah, it was. I think along the way of Just Eat, by then I'd taken the company public in 2014 on the London Stock Exchange. It was a
Yeah,
surreal journey. Honestly, Just Eat was a surreal journey for me. Obviously, from a boy from South Wales, I always loved business. I had like my own paper round when I was 11, 12. I'd always been pretty self-sufficient, financially. I didn't, at university the same. And so I always wanted to have a business. I just never had real any means of raising capital. So I love Jesper for that reason, actually, because we bootstrapped Just Eat. So we literally,
yeah,
every time we grew, we hired another employee. We used to say every time we get another £2,000 in revenue, we'll hire another employee. And so we literally bootstrapped Just Eat until 2008-9 when we got venture capital funding from Index Ventures. And at that point, we were able to obviously invest and grow much quicker. But up until
yeah,
then, Just Eat was built literally in a basement flat in Canary Wharf and bootstrapped for the first 2 years in its life in the UK. So when we started buying businesses like Hungry House, it all happened very gradually and naturally. So, for the first, I mean, that would have been 10 years after we'd started the company. So by then I'd
yeah. So not overnight.
yeah, it wasn't like, honestly, when we IPO'd in 2014, some of the newspapers were like, Just Eat's like an overnight success. And the truth was, by then we'd done 8 years of really hard slog, to build a company. And it was just that we became, I guess, in the media conscious at that point, because
Yeah,
so they became aware of us when we became a public company. The mass media became aware of this company called Just Eat that was now worth £1 billion or something. But we've been going for 8 years, and we bought companies in Spain and Italy in 2011, 12. We'd merged with a company in Brazil in 2012, 2013. So it was like a natural progression. So by the time we got like buying people like Hungry House in 2016, it was, I never took it for granted, but it started to feel like it would with any job. It just was kind of natural that we looked at competitors in the space, and if we thought they complemented what we were doing and could help us grow, we would look to acquire if the price was correct. So it was just a very natural thing. It never happened quickly. It took a long, long time. So that made it a lot more comfortable, I think, for me, as to sort of, I guess, grow into the job, if you like, as being the CEO.
yeah, and it's always interesting when people go, oh, it's you become an overnight success, or you've come out of nowhere and all of a sudden you're there. People, I think, don't actually see the hard work that kind of goes into these things, all the trial and error, the things you wish you could do, and the hard graft and the hours that you put in, all the travel and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden, everybody labels you a overnight success. I mean, yeah, the success that was 8 or 10 years in the making. It's not quite overnight, is it?
Look, and the truth is, people, when you IPO a company, everyone thinks your jokes are funny and you're a bit of a genius. The truth is, I always think, you're never as daft as people think. You're never as good as people think. You're probably like most people, you're somewhere in between. So I always used to take all that stuff with a massive pinch of salt, because I got the same friends and my brothers and stuff. So you never get ahead of yourself when you're surrounded, I think, by good people. But I think the reality is it's bloody hard work. If I think, I'm not joking, I did genuinely. I look back even today and think, did I sacrifice too much? There were times when I look at my marriage and think I nearly lost that. I definitely nearly lost. I definitely missed. Still now I feel a little bit guilty. My eldest boy, You know, I was telling him I was making tea when we spoke earlier. You know, first 4 or 5 years of his life, I genuinely barely spent time because Monday to Friday I was traveling around the world, you know, all over the gaff. And if I wasn't traveling, I was working stupid hours. It was only really Saturday mornings I'd spend time with him. And now I would never have done that. If I'd have, at the time, I was so committed and there was so much happening in the company and I was so determined it was going to become a success. And I was so, as a first time CEO, I wanted to prove to people that, you know, I was capable of being CEO and I wasn't going to fuck it up. So I was so like bloody minded about all those things. I was probably irrationally committed to making it work and trying to be the best CEO I could be. I think to some extent, and I'm not proud of it, I'm probably to some extent was willing to sacrifice anything to some extent. Anything's too far, but a lot. I sacrificed a lot. And certainly on the personal side, you know, I sacrificed a lot. And I think that was probably a little bit of immaturity. And if I could do it again, I'd do it differently now, especially probably the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years where I think I was just, you know, I was honest to God.
Good.
Yeah, mate, I can remember leaving a takeaway restaurant in Newcastle called Antep Pizza. It's probably still there. And I think I left there at 1 o'clock in the morning. I finished installing the Just Eat equipment and I'd arrived in Newcastle like, I don't know, 8, 9 in the previous day. And I can remember leaving at 1 a.m. and driving down the A1M1 thing in a Citroen Berlingo so I could be at the office for 7 in the morning. So we could do it all again in London. So, and that honestly, that's not like an outlying example. It was in, I remember once, right, I've got this Citroen Berlingo in the garage, by the way. I kept it, right? I've got it, I've genuinely got it in the garage.
Brilliant.
The first Just Eat Citroen Berlingo, I drove it from Canary Wharf, right, to Glasgow. And I drove with a guy who was working with at the time, who's a good friend of mine, still called Hassan Khan. And Hassan and I drove. He was like the salesperson for Birmingham. I must have picked him up in Birmingham, actually. I drove up to Glasgow with this thing, and we got just past Carlisle in this Berlingo. And he said, Dave, can we stop? My like head's vibrating. And Hassan was always like a bit of a baby. So Hassan, come on, man. We've only got like a couple of hours left to go or something. Let's just get there. We'd be like driving for like whatever many hours it'd be. So we got to Glasgow. And like, honest to God, we got this car and like both of us like, why is our like vision and our heads like shaking? And I think from being in the Berlingo for like 8, 9 hours on a motorway, we had like this sort of like shakes. After about obviously 2, 3 minutes, it just went, but it was like, oh God, you know. So there was like, and you know, so we had some really fun times though. I mean, you know, we worked stupid hours, but it was good fun. We had, you know, we'd always have a couple of beers or go out, you know, after 2, 3 days in the city and stuff like that. So we worked hard, but we celebrated success, and I think that was, our culture was good. You know, we worked hard, but we definitely celebrated and had a bit of fun with each other at the back end of a week. And I think these days probably actually it would have been way too boozy as a culture. Actually, looking back, this was 2005, 6. It was okay, but well, I'm not for sure it was okay, but it was kind of normal. These days, I'm sure now, as a CEO or something, you wouldn't be allowed, because we would generally go out clubbing or to pubs and you know that was part of the, I guess, relieving a bit of the stress after 3, 4, 5 days of working crazy hours. But look back on that with fond memories.
I did something similar once. I had to fly up to Newcastle, get a car, drive across to the other side of the country because it was cheaper to fly up rather than drive all the way. Do a training session with somebody, drive back to Newcastle. I think I dropped the car off at like 2 a.m. in the morning, jump on a plane, and then I was back at the office for 8 o'clock the next morning. I was going, okay. I think I checked into my hotel and I may have slept for like 2 hours or something before then having to hand the car back and just, right, I'm at my desk, I'm good to go. Yeah, the Red Bull and you know, Pro Plus kind of days. Yeah, crazy.
I think when you know, if I look back at Just Eat now, for example, you know, Just Eat I think when I left, there was like 2,200 employees. And I always, you know, used to genuinely, sincerely say it was, you know, it was built by, I used to say it was like 2,000 founders. And if you can create a culture where everyone feels a sense of ownership, and everybody in our company had shares in Just Eat, so we created an option pool, which at the time was like, you know, would have been quite one of the early companies.
I've heard of, probably.
Yeah. And so everyone added shares in the company, and we created, I think, a really nice culture around ownership and a sense of ownership. And we had this quite nice phrase of like, you know, built by 2,000 founders. and there was sincerity in that. We didn't say it like as a gimmicky thing. I think we felt that we had a very flat culture. It was very irreverent. I would get regularly rinsed by everyone in the company. I remember being thrown at my office once, and like the guys from Goldman Sachs couldn't believe it. They were like, "Yeah, but Dave, you're the CEO of a public company." He's like, a FTSE 100 company in London. I think there was a couple of like engineers or something having a meeting in my office. Like, just like, Dave, can you just come back in a bit? We just finished. Oh yeah. And the guy from Goldman, what? I was like, no, boys, we have to go to sit in the kitchen. Don't worry about it. Like, who cares? It's just an office. Like, it doesn't matter. But we tried to.
That's a great culture. Yeah, that's a great culture to have.
Yeah, a genuine sense of that. Yeah, and that was true. I think I think when you're Welsh, you don't really like hierarchical. I mean, I'm generalising a bit, but I don't like that sort of sense of
the rebellion.
Yeah, I quite like that irreverence thing. I don't really like cultures that are people. Yeah, I don't really like that. It's not really my thing.
So let me ask you this: so when you left Just Eat, did you get like a lifetime discount code or something?
Yeah, black card.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you look at my figure, mate, I'm definitely a man built for takeaway. Let's put it that way.
No arguments there. So you went on that entire journey, and then you ended up being the chairman of the Dragons. I mean, I can't imagine any kind of kid in there, when they're growing up, going, you know what, when I grow up, I want to be chairman of a professional rugby team. It sounds like a great idea. Said no one ever. So, how did this come about?
Yeah, so a lot of credit goes to another man as well, Martin Phillips, who at the time was the CEO of Welsh Rugby, and he's a really great guy and someone I really like actually at the personal level. He's a good human being, I guess, which is always important. And Martin, I think Martin said he read a story about Just Eat or something in the paper. I think it was in the Sunday Times, and I think there was like a profile in it. And they happened to say, and the CEO is this like David Buttress character, and he happens to be they had to like they asked me something like, what do I do for fun or something? And I said, well, my passion is Welsh Rugby. Oh, they said, who would you be if you were in the CEO of Just Eat? Who would you like to be? And I said, I'd love to be Dan Bigger because he's number 10 for Wales. Number 10 for Wales, which is a lot of Welsh people. I'd said half for Wales is probably the best job.
Well, yeah. I mean that's God's position, isn't it?
So... There you go, right? So I think I said that's my answer. So then Martin just reached out and said, listen, love to meet you, sort of thing. We had a chat.
Are you available for Saturday?
Yeah. No, unfortunately, you need talent for that. But so I was never getting that phone call. But then what happened was he said, look, we've just taken over the Dragons, and I happen to be obviously from Cwmbran, born and bred. My dad lives in Malpas in Newport, which is a kilometre maximum from Rodney Parade, maybe less. My grandfather was treasurer of Pontypool District Rugby. All my nan's family were Newport Corporation Road, which is literally, one of the entrances onto Rodney Parade's off Corporation Road. That's where my nan was from and grew up, and all of my uncles. So I had this like massive connection to the area. I love rugby. Used to go to Pontypool with my granddad. I was a ball boy at Pontypool Rugby Club. So, I was like huge, as you can sense now, a big rugby fan. And then, so Martin said, look, we've just taken this Dragons business over, which I obviously knew well from being a fan of Welsh Rugby. So look, it's been insolvent. We bought it out of bankruptcy. It's lots of problems. It's a rebuild. And honestly, he had me at hello because I love building things. I love Welsh Rugby, and I'm a bit of a sucker for a challenge, really. So when something's difficult, I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting. It's probably why I did the cost of living job. And and I like if I can to help, if it's like, why I like doing that. I get a lot of energy, and I don't mind difficult things. I can always forgive myself for failing. I almost can't forgive myself if I didn't have a go. And so that's what bit me. And when I met the people at the club, they're just brilliant people. Like honestly, the guys I met at Rodney Parade, and the guys at Ystrad Mynach at the training ground, the players, it's a great group and they deserve success. And I hope, we can help create that. And if I can play a very small part in helping to create that the next few years, then I'll do my best or die trying. It's so honestly, for me, it was Martin genuinely had me at hello, really. Although, I never thought I ever wanted to own a professional sports team, because we all know, that's littered with complications and financial problems. But sometimes in life, it's about, I think when you look back on your life, it's about the experiences you've created and the risks you've taken, and sometimes, you know, it's best to have a go than sit on your backside and do nothing.
Well, let's face it. I mean, it's certainly a challenge to get involved in rugby at the moment, let alone Welsh rugby, which is always an absolute minefield. I mean, first of all, what are your views on regional rugby? So one of my previous guests was the architect himself, David Moffat. So, kind of, what are your views on regional rugby? Should Welsh rugby have always stayed as it was with the kind of the more provincial or town teams rather than going into regionalism?
Yeah, I think it's easy to criticize, you know, in hindsight about, you know, I think all those guys obviously did their best in what was probably quite a complicated time in terms of context. I think you had probably 8, 9 teams that didn't want to go down to 4 or 5 teams. So they had to come up with solutions for that. So I don't disregard history, because the context in which they made decisions in was their context at the time. I think, though, for me personally, and I'm always trying to be pretty frank about these things. I think there was 2 big mistakes. I think in Wales we have rugby clubs. I don't think we have, you know, regions in that sense. I don't think we identify that with that. There's people, when I was growing up as a kid, I went up the club. You know, my granddad used to call Pontypool Rugby Club the club. You know, and you go up the club. And when I played for Crossy Kellogg Rugby Club, I went up the club. You know, we have clubs, and there's great strength in that, because I think there's a sense of genuine authenticity and community, which I think in Wales is really important to us. And I think there's also the sort of the history of that. And I think it was a mistake. You'd never chuck away a brand, you know, I don't think, that has 100, 120 years of heritage and authenticity behind it, without really carefully considering, you know, what the hell you were doing. And I think so. I understand the context in why they made those decisions, but I think if you could go back now, I think you'd have kept them as clubs, and I think I'm not sure it'd been possible to deliver, actually, because I don't think, like I said, I would 8, 9 teams at the time ever gone down to 4 or 5, because by definition, someone would have to say, well, I'll close, and people were never going to do that. So I definitely understand how they got to where they got to. But I think from where we sit today, you know, we've inserted RFC back into our name, Rugby Football Club, because we feel a club and we are a club. You know, as you know, Cardiff have gone back to Cardiff Rugby. I suppose they dropped Blues. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the brands develop the next 2, 3, 4 years. I think we've got to be true to ourselves. I think in Wales we have rugby clubs, and there's a lot of pride in that. And I think we should accept that we're clubs. And in reality, the areas we come from really are just development pathways. So do the Dragons, are we responsible for developing, you know, the elite rugby players of Gwent? Absolutely. I know we're very proud of that. Absolutely. But I think at the front end of that, we're still a rugby club. And I think the same for Cardiff, you know, and I think the same for others. So it'll be interesting to see how the brands further evolve. But I think for me, you know, in Wales, let's not kid ourselves. We're rugby clubs, and that's where the strength lies, both in terms of the authenticity, but also the history.
Definitely. And you mentioned about the kind of rebrand, because when we kind of look at it, was it Newport? It was first of all Gwent, and then it was Newport Gwent Dragons, and then it was Newport Dragons, and then I think it's got the Dragons, and now it's Dragons RFC. How has the new brand gone down, really, with the supporters in the region?
I think it's gone down really well. Honestly, the feedback's really. There'd be some that would like us to have gone and just been Newport. I think, being blunt with you,
But I think that's Welsh rugby in general, isn't it? It's very tribal.
Yeah, and some would say, well, you can, and others would say you can never put Newport in the name, because then, you know, that's, you know, and I'm very respectful of Newport's history, right? Because, you know, like I say, one whole half of my family were Newport fans, so I definitely get the history, you know. So I'm not some, you know, I'm not from a different hemisphere or whatever. I definitely get it, and I understand it. So I love history. I did a history A level. I'm interested in history, and so when I see the Springbok head at Rodney Parade, I find it inspiring, actually. So I think you've always got to be very respectful of the fact that there's been a history long before us. But at the same time, we have to be authentic to ourselves now. And after 20 years, it just didn't feel quite right. I definitely feel the rugby club thing is right. And I think we've done the right thing. And that's gone down well. And so it should have, because I think we always should have been, you know, an RFC. I don't know why we went away from that in terms of regionalisation. I just don't think it was ever going to stick in Wales as an authentic thing. And then I think, you know, from a name perspective, I do think ideally you have a place name. I do think ideally if you could go back, I think I really respect what Cardiff Rugby have done, for example. I think what Cardiff Rugby have done is spot on. It'd be interesting to see how that evolves the next 2, 3, 4 years. But I think, I think the fact you talk to how it's changed so many times, that really tells you that they never quite got it right. Right?
Yeah.
Because you don't,
exactly.
If you keep tweaking with something, we weren't just eats and then just eat and then, or just eater and then, or just, it's like, we made the name, we like the name, we stuck with it. You build
and you back it.
Yeah, you back it and you go, right. And that probably tells you something, right?
Yeah, well, definitely. And it kind of always felt like it was, I don't know, kind of looking back on it, Newport merging with Ebervale and you kind of, was it, let's face it, merging two teams together is never really going to work, and you're never going to please anybody with it.
Mate, you can't do it in Wales. Like, honestly, in Cwmbran, when I grew up, you've got Crossy Kilog and Cwmbran, right? I played for Crossy Rugby Club. You'd want to kill Cwmbran Rugby Club. That's how it is. Now, honestly, if we to go on our striker bikes or our BMXs, it would take us approximately 4 minutes to cycle between Crossy Kilog, maybe a bit more, 5 minutes, to Cwmbran Rugby Club, right? But it's honestly, I remember feeling it. I wanted to kill him when we played against him. But that's the passion, right? That's where the authenticity is, and we've got to harness that passion, not try and put something over the top of it, which just doesn't feel authentic and true. And I think that's where the brand's lost their way. I also think in Wales is one thing I would also say in Wales, we are world class at moaning. I mean, we love a good sap, and we've got to be careful that sometimes we do talk ourselves down into failure. Or we talk ourselves down into not being able to perform and back ourselves as well as we should. It was when I first started working in the US, it was complete rude awakening to me. Like, all the positivity, I literally couldn't deal with it. I'm like, why are all these people encouraging you and encouraging us and encouraging me and saying we're great at what we do? You're just like, oh my God, this is like really uncomfortable. And I realized it's because, honestly, that's not how we are wired, especially Gwen.
Yeah.
We love a little bit of a moan and a sappuccino. And so we've got to be careful with that, though, because if we're not conscious about it, we definitely want to drag each other down or lift each other up. And in Wales, if there's one thing we hate more than failure, is success. And sometimes, we've got to be a bit careful of that, because, I genuinely want the Scarlets to do well. I want the WRU to go well. I want, the Ospreys and Cardiff to grow, because I see our success as kind of connected. And of course, I want to beat them when we play them, but no one gets better if we just kick each other down. And there's a bit of that goes on, especially, off the field. And we've got to, and I'm glad to say that's the last year or two, I think, under the leadership of Malcolm Wall, who's chairing the PRB, things have, I think, got to a much healthier place. And a lot of credit goes to Malcolm, a good Englishman from Harlequins, who I think has added a lot of value to Welsh rugby in terms of elevating the quality of strategic leadership around how we grow the game. And I think as supporters, we've all got to be conscious of that. Kicking each other down is not going to lead to success. It just won't. It's okay to be, I think,
competitive,
constructively critical and competitive, but let's not boot each other down. It's not a good way to lead.
No, and I think anybody kind of looking from the outside in on Welsh rugby, you look at over the years, years ago when Rhys Priestland left the Scarlets, there was a lot of negativity because he had maybe a few bad games, and then he went to Bath, and Bath loved him. And I still rate Rhys as a great player, but I totally understand why he had to get out from being under the microscope of Welsh rugby, because no player becomes bad overnight. They might have a few bad games or things like that, but it doesn't make them a bad player. Same as I was talking to Ben Whitehouse, the referee, a couple of weeks ago. And again, just because a referee has a bad game doesn't make them a bad referee. There's 101 different things, but certainly as Welsh rugby supporters, people get on the forums, be keyboard warriors, and always like to have a moan about something. And I can imagine, the Dragons obviously haven't been one of the most successful regions.
Gentlemen.
So diplomatic. But I mean that's got to kind of put a bit more kind of pressure on you guys, and especially because you seem to have grown the squad really well over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, I have to say, it's I think you make a great point. I think when I first got involved, and I look at the squad, and obviously, no disrespect to anyone involved, I think we have improved the squad, right? I think the squad this year is our best ever squad, I would say. I think last year, I think I probably would have said the
same. As a Scarlets fan, when I kind of looked at your recruitments and everything over the summer, even I was kind of like, that's going to be a bit of a difficult one.
We've recruited well. I mean, I think all the Dragons have historically always we've been a bit thin on depth. I think that probably always will be a challenge because of the finances. But I agree with you. I think the challenge is the world is tough, right? In terms of what I'm talking about is the league we're in. The URC now, honestly, I think it's the best league that certainly we've ever played in. It's those 4 South African sides. I think I remember saying, actually, before they joined, I remember saying in a professional rugby board meeting for Welsh Rugby, guys, 3 or 4 Leinsters are about to join this league. And I think that's been proven to be true. The final last year was 2 South African teams. They've done Leinster, so we're talking about 3 Leinsters have joined this league. So if we had this squad when I joined 4 years ago, I think we'd have won a lot of rugby matches. I think this year we're hoping, obviously, to win as many games as we can. But let's not be under any illusions. This league is a bloody competitive league. Scotland Rugby is investing more money in the pro game than it ever has. Italian rugby, look at Benetton and Zebra at home now.
Yeah.
That's a tough proposition now. I saw Zebra first game of the season play Leinster out in Italy. Leinster really struggled to get the grips of that until the last 15, 20 minutes. When I first got involved 4 years ago, Leinster probably would have won that game by 30 points with their third
a B team. Yeah.
So
exactly.
This league, and this is about, I think, when I go back to being negative and positive or having a bit of a sap, we've got to get behind these teams in Wales because this league is a bloody hard league. It's almost like I don't like to draw comparisons with football, but it's the top end of our club game. And if you look at the URC, it's a very competitive. We're playing against Leinster, whose budget is probably 2.5 times ours, maybe 3. So when Liverpool play, say, I don't know, Crystal Palace or something, or Manchester City playing Everton, that's not a level playing field financially. They've clearly got more resources, and the same is true in all pro sports. So I think we want to be competitive, we want to win lots of games, and we've got to build Welsh rugby so it can be at the higher end and later stages of competitions. We're all in this for success. No one I speak to, whether at the Scarlets, the Ospreys, Cardiff, the WRU, or us at the Draft, none of us are in it because we want to lose. None of us are, whether that's a player, a chairman, a committee person, a director, whatever it is, supporters. We all want to be part of a successful build. But let's be under no illusions. This is a tough league with some very good players in it now. And so there's pretty much week to week, there's no easy games. So we've got to give ourselves a little bit of a break sometimes and say, look, let's grow, let's push ourselves to become ever more successful. But let's also not bash everybody down if they have a tough weekend or so, or a few bad results, because it is a tough league. But at the same time, we've got to reassure people that we are building towards something. And I think that's the rightful thing we could be criticised for. Because since I've been involved, I don't feel like it's been clear, even to me, what are we building towards? How are we going to become successful? What's the stable investment model by which we can grow Welsh pro rugby? And I think that is a fair criticism that we do need to resolve off the field. But I think the other stuff, let's not kid ourselves. This URC is a bloody good league with some very good players.
Absolutely, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the Just Eat days. It wasn't an overnight success. It wasn't the case of, well, we just clicked our fingers, brought a couple of people in, and all of a sudden, you take the league by storm. Like you said, we've added the South African sides in, the Italian sides. Gone are the days where you could, put a few youth players into a side against the Italian boys, and they'd do a job. They've really come a long way, and there are no easy games in this league anymore. And I think people have to realise that times have changed. Whilst squads have got better and players have got better, everybody is in the same boat. Everybody's got better, and do you find the kind of budget thing a bit of a frustration in terms of when you are going up against the Leinster and you go, they've got the wealth of riches there, or even people like Munster, where they've got 2 stadiums. So if you're one of the big teams, great, you're in the big stadium, and if you're not, then you're in the little one. I mean,
I don't mind that.
It's got to be frustrating.
I don't mind that so much because, as we showed, we beat Munster at home a couple of weeks ago, and all credit the players for that. So we've got the talent. I think the thing I get frustrated around budget-wise is Leinster will know in June 2022 what their budget is for July 23. And honestly, in the 3-4 years I've been involved with Welsh Rugby, I find out our budget is so late. It can be as late as June 23 for July 23. And that's my response. That's just, you can't build anything.
You can't plan anything. Yeah, you can't build a business or anything.
No, and we're living year to year as well. So it's not like I know in June 23 for them the next 3 years. I know for the next 12 months. By the way, by which time everything's done anyway. So then you're either going to be over budget, under budget, or managing yourself, in a way that's really short term. And that's true of all the teams. So I think professional rugby in Wales, and again, I give a bit of credit to Malcolm Wall here. We're wrestling that down, so we have a 3 to maybe even 5-year finance model that we can go forward from, which will be a much better play. You can't build anything the way Welsh rugby's been won the last 10 years. Nothing is a surprise in life, right? You just look at the data and facts about how Welsh rugby's run itself the last 10, 20 years, and it makes actually sense why we've got ourselves in a bit of a pickle off the field.
Yeah.
You have to be able to know that 3, 4, 5 years down the line, this will be your budget. Then it becomes about how can you plan and execute? What are your priorities? How good at you are executing against those priorities, which is how people then should be measured, whether they're good at their jobs or not. And you can't do that when you basically set people up to fail by them never knowing what's around the corner. And when they do know what's around the corner, it's right at the last second, and they only know for the next 5 minutes. And then in 12 months' time, they're back in the same place. So, I'm glad to say that's going to change. I'm very optimistic that that's hopefully never been closer, because it gives us at least a chance. And I think players deserve that, supporters deserve that, and I think all of us involved deserve that, because it's otherwise it's this annual merry-go-round, and we're rightly criticised for it, and we need to stop it.
Well, let's face it. I mean, you can almost compare it to not knowing your starting lineup until 5 minutes before you actually go out of the tunnel. And I suppose you look around the forums. Look, we know that rugby is not. I was almost going to go full Nigel Davis, and it's not soccer, and we know that there's an imbalance in terms of funding. Look at what's happened with Worcester and Wasps and what could ever happen. And then you've got people going, well, actually, why can't you pick up a couple of players? And it's as simple as you said. Your budget's already set. Your budgets were set 5 minutes before you were given them. So therefore, it's not like you can then just go, oh, well, we'll just pick up player X and Y and enhance our squad. I mean,
it's not good for anyone, mate. It's not good for anyone because it doesn't. No. So I think it'll be better for everyone. I'm happy to say, hopefully now we're going to be in a better place with it. But we have to acknowledge that we haven't always helped ourselves, because that is the truth, and people have a right to know that. But I think we are going to hopefully change that, because one of my big worries, of course, worry is the wrong word, because actually I love soccer, but going back to your Nigel Owens thing, but it's like it's. The challenge is, in Wales, I see it with my kids, that we're not competing anymore. I'm not competing with Cardiff Rugby for supporters. I'm competing with, football, PlayStation, apathy. I'm competing with tennis. We're competing with the kids now have such a choice, such a choice of leisure activities. And as we all know, and it's not because of cost of living, the leisure pound is a highly competitive pound you're going after. Mum and dad, parents, guardians have a choice. They have a choice where they spend their money. And rugby has to provide the best product experience it can. Things like overlapping fixtures with internationals, bonkers. Things about throwing more fixtures at the league when actually better quality, lesser games is clearly the way to go to create more television appointment to view events. Clearly the way to go, get all the big names, on the pitch for big fixtures, clearly the way to go. Rugby has to take care of itself as a product prioritize it really clearly. Don't compromise those things. Be a bit like we were at Just Eat. There's certain things you can just never compromise. Don't compromise customer experience. Don't compromise restaurant choice. Don't compromise being the number one provider in every area in terms of all the selection of food available. So there's things when you're building things, you have to be uncompromising around, and rugby has to be the same. Otherwise, we will continue to see us lose market share, potentially to other sports or to apathy or to computers or whatever. We need to be caring about that and focused on that as we look to grow the game. Because I want, rugby's a brilliant sport, but it's not without its challenges. My boy plays football, and my wife, rugby. And my wife will say to me, she worries about injury and head injury because she reads about it like everyone else. Rugby has to get ahead of those things now and make sure that it creates a game that, can, as I say, be something that, we put in a position where it's for the next generations to come. And, we owe that to everyone, previous players, existing players, and future players. So those are the things I'd like to see us focused on discussion, and not just, what's our budget the next 12 months. That is not a way to build something. That is poor, and we need to be much better.
Absolutely, and you kind of see it across the board. One of my previous guests was Jamie Cudmore, and it's been well documented in terms of his experience in the last few years of Clermont, where head injuries coming off and then being put back on after failing the HIAs, and the knock-on effects of that. You've seen loads of players. There's that documentary with Steve Thompson as well, and these are all just terrible things that are happening, and they don't seem to be addressed. I
think thankfully there's a lot happening, and credit to those guys for highlighting those issues. I think it's very brave. And I watched the Steve Thompson thing. It was incredibly moving. When he talking about his kids. As a parent myself, you can't remember things. It's just it's very painful, right? And you can feel it. And none of us want that. And you wouldn't. None of us. This is a game I think we all love. I mean, it's got great values. It's got so much to offer. Anyone who wants to play it. And so I think we've just got to make sure now we protect, if that's the right phrase, the people that come and play, past, present, future, but also protect the game as well, that it's able to, be as relevant for the next 50 years as it has been the last 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've kind of, not on the same scale as you. I've taken over coaching a team going back to the rivalry. I spent 20 years at one club, hating the club I'm currently at, who are literally 5 minutes down the road. And now I find myself, having played a few games, I'm now the head coach, going, oh, okay, some of these boys are all right. I don't need to go crazy. But kind of arguing with certainly the Somerset RFU of going, well, we're limited to 3 replacements. So you're saying that 50% of players have not come back after COVID. We're trying to grow a squad, and you're only giving me 3 replacements, even though people are getting, injuries are on the rise because boys haven't played for a while and all this. Player welfare is an absolute key issue that I think there's still a lot of ground that can be done to get back on that. And I almost take the kind of look at American football with the concussion issues over there and how they're now looking after players that have left the game. Do you think there's more that we can be doing?
I think that the good thing is that honestly, everyone I speak to in the game cares about it massively. They care about the players. They care about the welfare. It's the first priority, actually. So I do think it'll get sorted out in a good way. I think World Rugby are on it. I think the governing bodies are. I think everyone I speak to in the game, whether they're players, coaches, administrators, chairman, whatever they are, everyone passionately cares about this issue in a good way and wants to provide the right. Get it right. And I think there's lots that's been done and improved. There's more that can always be done. And I'm sure the game and the guys working on it, and consulting on it will rugby. We got it. We will. It's so important to everyone. I think it's one of those things will have to be resolved in a good way because, it's, if you love the game, you ultimately the players are the heroes of the game. They're the gold dust that we all care about. And and none of us want to be seeing things like the Steve Thompson. It was just so sad, and we just it's So I'm there's lots to be done on it clearly, but I think the intent is really good, and I think hopefully that'll get us to a good place. And I'm sure it will. And the COVID thing's been tough, right? I mean, you touch on COVID there. I mean, I can tell you,
Yeah.
from a financial perspective, if you look at COVID, the impact COVID has had, on all of us financially. Well, you've seen the impact as well in England, right? Recently, it's the COVID donut. It is tough financially. I've definitely never worked in such a sort of challenging financial environment in any business, including startups. I think COVID for the professional game was as tough.
That was devastating.
Tough as it can be. It was as tough can. I think the fact that we've all come out of it, in Wales at least, I think a lot of credit goes to everyone at the 4 clubs and the Welsh Rugby Union to some extent. A lot of credit, because it was not, honestly, it was as tough as I've ever experienced.
I can imagine that. Kind of, again, looking from the outside in and seeing seeing games with 0 crowds, or seeing teams, like the Scarlets and the Cardiff being stuck in South Africa because it's hit, and then forfeiting games and all of this, and I mean, and
we're not out of it yet, right? You see what's happening in England now, and Wales were not out of it either. As you know, the clubs off, between 4.5 and 5.5 million of COVID loans, because obviously we didn't get the funding from the union in the COVID year. And so, that's a significant amount of debt for what are relatively small businesses, in effect, turning over 10, 12, 13 million a year. That's a huge amount of debt. I mean,
that's what I was actually going to. Yeah, that's what I was actually going to see. I know we said at the start, is there anything off limits? But I was going to ask you, what, can you give your views on this kind of?
Nothing's off limits. It's always good to put everything on the table.
Well, I mean, looking at the COVID loans and kind of what I've read from there, that the union have taken out the loans and then basically just dumped it onto the regions, and it's, well, we're not giving you funding, you boys pay this back. I mean, that's got to be ridiculously frustrating, because Team Wales is still kind of generating money. Was it £13 million worth of profit last year? And you kind of go, but hang on, you just dumped the regions with this loan rather than giving them funding, and Team Wales, who, without the regions, there are no players on the pitch to put bums in seats and things like that. It's got to be frustrating, hasn't it?
It's been tough, right? And there's no getting away from it. And it has put a lot of strain, is the reality. I think we've got to deal with facts, though, as well, right? We all signed up to the professional rugby agreement, the PRA. And in the PRA, it was very clear, if with obviously the Welsh Rugby Union's funding going away as well because of COVID, they were playing empty stadiums, that the amount of money we were given was exactly as the terms of the PRA. So, that was, so, I guess I come from a commercial world. When you sign a deal, a
deal is a deal.
A deal's a deal. And so nothing happened there that wasn't in the PRA. I guess what I would say is no one foresaw COVID, I think, understandably. Yeah. So when we all signed up the PRA, no one foresaw a 100-year Black Swan event. Now, you could argue that we should have done, but we didn't. And of course, as a result of that, we've obviously and understandably then ended up with these loans. I think, we've got to, I'd rather focus on genuinely, and I feel like a politician now, but we've got to deal with the reality of it, and the reality is, I can sit here and anyone could sit here and say, oh, it's not fair, whatever, right? It was a deal's a deal, and what I would say is, it's how we now work together as the Welsh Rugby Union, the 4 clubs, to deal with the COVID loans, is how we'll be measured. So over the next 2-3 years, let's try and make sure that Welsh Rugby is the professional sort of union of teams and governing body that comes out of COVID in a way that's sustainable and stable. And then over the next 2-3 years, we can start to think about how we grow and become ever more successful, because we've survived, what has been an extraordinarily difficult period of COVID and financial realities. And I think if we can do that, I think, those things start to become a thing of the past. But we're not out of that yet. And you're right to flag it, because though, it's not going to be easy. But I think, as I say, I'm cautiously optimistic that everyone involved. I go back to this word intent. It's a bit like if people have good intent, then you can do a lot of great things together, and it builds trust. And I think everyone I look at around the table, whether it's Malcolm as chair of PRB, Steve as the CEO of Welsh Rugby, and us as 4 clubs in Welsh Rugby, all our intent, I think, is to build a deal financially that enables to have stability the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years. That's what I see genuinely. That's the intent. If we have the competence, we'll be able to deliver against that intent. And if we do that, we give ourselves a chance then to show our supporters and players that we are going to have to make some tough decisions and restructure some parts of the game financially. But nevertheless, we'll be able to grow and become stable and ever more competitive, which is in the end what everyone wants. So I think that's what I would honestly say to you, Matt. And the intent's good. And that's why sometimes, when I see some of that, you said about Reece Priestland earlier, and that's why I would criticize the game a bit, because I saw a bit, what I found probably the most I didn't like was probably Alex Cuthbert. I thought some of the way how he was treated was awful. And I think, that goes back, and mostly in parts of the media, actually, to be blunt. And I think, that goes to intent. Like, what's a person's intent? And I see it still sometimes in the Welsh media. Like, and sometimes the intent is just to get clicks or just to get, eyeballs on things. It's not really to provide intelligent critique or to provide objective critique. It's just actually to sensationalize, and the intent is poor. Therefore, it's just poor. It's actually piggybacking off the game, and I dislike that part. I look at, when I look at, mistakes, or I look at challenges, I look at what a person's intent is. And if their intent is good, but they just screwed something up, I'm all for forgiveness and learning and moving on. When the intent's poor, that's when I really get my heckles up and I get pretty frustrated. And I think, there are sometimes when the intent is poor.
Yeah, and the number of articles I've read on certain online publications, where it is just clickbait. The headline, kind of states one thing, but the article has nothing to do with it, and it's a slow Tuesday morning in the newsroom, and it's just crazy. But bringing it back, so what does the future look like for the Dragons?
Yeah, so I think probably 3 big things. I think, we've got to get the club private. Honestly, when I got involved, I never thought for 1 second. I was asked by the union to be non-exec chair, never asked to obviously buy the club or own the club. And if they had asked me, I'd have gone, you must be joking. I haven't spent 12 years of my life trying to secure my family's future to now, go and risk it on professional sport. But, when you get passionate about something, you get bitten by a bug. I love the people there. Sometimes, like I say, you look back on life and think you've got to take a bit of risk sometimes to get reward. So the first thing is we've got to get a club private. I think there's 2 or 3 of us that are going to do that together. I think we're in a good place with the union. We're having really good discussions. Full credit to them in that. I think Malcolm Wall, who's the chairman of PRB, is doing a super job trying to land a new financial deal for Welsh Rugby, which enables us then to take it private. So probably the sequencing actually is new deal for Welsh professional rugby, get the club private. That's probably the first 2 things. Yeah. And then what does the future like? Let's make sure. This sounds a really boring, uninspiring thing to say. Let's get the club.
Come on, give us a big claim. When are you going to win the European trophies?
Let's get the club bloody stable and thriving and happy and win some rugby matches. And then let's dare to dream that in time we do a good job and it can become the powerhouse. I want Gwent Rugby to be going back to how it used to feel when I grew up. Remember when you used to come to play rugby in Gwent? No one liked coming to play rugby in Gwent. No one. Whether it was Pontypool, Newport, Ebervale, you were like, oh God, you knew it was going to be a really tough afternoon. And I think I want people, when they come to Gwent to play rugby professionally, to think, oh my God, what a nightmare. We're going to be in Rodney Parade and it's going to be really horrible. And I think in a good way, obviously.
Depending on who you are.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think we'll know we're onto something good, as we ever more build towards that. And I don't think we're far away. We've got a great group of players now. They're pretty young. We've got a pretty good academy development pathway. We can make it better. Let's put Gwent Rugby back where it probably always should have been. And that's probably something that I feel very passionate about.
So when are you going to win the league? Give me a date. Give me a season. No, don't worry. I'm not going to push you on that.
Can I tell you what I want to do right now? My number one ambition.
Go on.
I'll tell you.
Go on then.
I want to beat Cardiff. I can't tell you how much I want to beat Cardiff. Do you know what? I've been chairman of the Dragons now, right, for 4 years. We've lost to Cardiff, right? Up until the recent game, we lost them 4 times for a total of something like 7 points or 6 points. It was like 1-2 points. And I'm unembarrassed to say, I'm dying inside to beat Cardiff. No offense to Dickie and Peter Cardiff, because they're great guys, but I'm desperate to beat Cardiff more than.
So let's rewind, and all the regions are working together, and we all.
Yeah.
No, I want to beat Cardiff.
Yeah, but on the field, come on, man. On the field is different.
Yeah, of course.
I like I say, Peter and Dickie, great guys, and Aline, but come on, man. I gotta beat Cardiff.
That's it. That's on the bucket list. Mission done. When you beat Cardiff, yeah.
Yeah, actually that's true. We'll beat Cardiff. I'm going to retire. That'll do. That'll do for me.
That's it. I'm done. Doesn't matter about anything else. We beat Cardiff.
Not that when that happens, it'll be anything to do with me, by the way. But it'll just be very satisfying.
It's all part of the machine. It's all right. We'll bundle it all together. It's fine.
Notice I said when it happens, because it will happen.
Exactly. You know what? We'll put. There'll be a red letter day on the calendar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dave, or rather David, it's been fantastic talking to you. I mean, really, really good. Look, there's so many other things that we could be touching upon, like the cost of living position you had with the government, or anything like that. Look, I'd love to get you back for a second episode, or even one I'd love to potentially do is bring back Simon Mudarak from the Scarlets and you as well.
I'd love
and
to
do a special episode.
Guy. Simon's lucky to have guys like, Welsh Rugby's lucky to have guys like Simon. He's a brilliant guy.
And from everything you said, your experience, I think having spoken to both of you two, I mean, that there's a lot of positivity and a lot of kind of, the future's bright. I mean, the future's Scarlets, not kind of, Dragons, but that's fine.
Do you know what? Scarlets, Llanelli's is such a great rugby club, right? I like you still have the saucepans on the roof of the post, don't you? Is that true? You do, haven't you? Yeah. I went down for Phil Bennett's obviously funeral, and I sort of sat there and I thought it's such a great club that because you just got that history, right? You walk up the stairs there and you've got all the pictures and stuff of the past, and that goes back to what we said earlier. That's Welsh rugby when it's at its best is absolutely
it's history.
It's deep rooted in its community. No sport in Wales can connect to the communities like rugby can. The authentic history, all the way, it's woven through everything. Like the communities, the clubs, the valleys, everywhere you go. Rugby in Wales is genuinely, at its best, interwoven with all those communities like no other sport is. And I think Scarlets and Llanelli, you definitely, it's a club I definitely admire and respect. I love the way you still have the saucepans on the post. I think it's great.
I mean, I used to be involved in the Supporters Trust years and years ago, and I mean, I certainly think that there is that still passion and that draw with the history as well. I think, and it's great to see you guys doing that with the Dragons and turning it back into a club. I think, whilst there will always be those keyboard warriors, I think it's been, even from my point of view as a Scarlet supporter, it's been great to see that kind of journey.
Yeah, I think sometimes in life, though, honestly, if you put yourself in these positions, this keyboard warrior thing, I think people worry far too much about it. Honestly, I couldn't care. I genuinely couldn't care less. Sometimes I try and wind them up. Sometimes I'll go back and just tease them a little bit. You just got to take it with a pinch of salt. I've only got like a few friends, 2 or 3 mates. I'm trying to get rid of one of them. It's like you can't worry about these. People who want to. I go back to intent, right? Is their intent poor? Of course it is. It's awful. Some of the stuff they write is absolutely horrendous. Yeah. But I just think, either they're not real anyway, it's just a bot, or if it is someone real, I just honestly, genuinely, I just couldn't care less what they think. I think that comes from a sense of, you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. It doesn't matter what, someone who's probably being pretty unfair and irrational is, and also they don't know you, they don't know your context, they don't know you, and you can't take it to heart like that. You just gotta you just got to have a little bit of a smile. But some of the stuff you do read, I mean, it is pretty bad. I mean, some of the stuff I get is like, oh my God, really? I can understand if my wife wrote that stuff about me, but some of these people haven't even met me. So it's like, you just got to take it with a pinch of salt.
Most definitely. David, it's been great. Like I say, great to kind of talk to you and get an insight into not only your journey in business, but actually into the journey of the Dragons as well. And
Pleasure.
great to have you on board. Well, I'll hold you to that. And like I said, we'll try and get an episode with Simon and maybe a couple of the other guys as well, and a bit of a forum. So, thanks for joining us. And look, guys, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you watch the other videos. We've got some fantastic interviews coming up as well. So do kind of enjoy. So thanks for watching the Business of Sport Show. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thank you.